Okay, so we are now live. Welcome, everyone. So good to be together. Familiar faces, new faces. It's a pleasure to be learning together always. And this class is part of Spring Zman at Drisha. Welcome to this first session of discussions on the Parashah, where we have the pleasure of learning Kedoshim with Tzophia Stepansky. Yay! Just a reminder that I'll be sending everyone an invitation to become a panelist. It will say accept invitation to be a panelist. That would allow you to show us your smiling face if you wish. You can also still keep your video off even as a panelist. And it would also, more importantly, give you the ability to unmute yourself when questions are invited. And I believe this will be pretty participatory. I think you can just jump in anytime, right? If you unmute yourself. And then just to make sure that we keep the class clear and sounding well for everyone, just remember to mute yourself when you're not speaking. I will also help mute yourself, so then you just need to remember to unmute yourself when you're ready to speak again. And then if you prefer, you can also write comments and questions on the chat here on Zoom, or if you're watching us live on Facebook, you can make comments there and I'll relay the messages. Just a few words about Tzophia. After completing her BA in Psychology and Judaic Studies at Yeshiva University, Tzophia continued her learning there in the Advanced Gemara and Halacha program, GPATS, I believe, for 3 years. Over the course of her time in GPAT, she served as a community scholar in multiple shuls. Tzophia has been involved in the Drisha community in various capacities. She has taught in the high school summer program and is the director of the middle school program. She recently made Aliyah with her husband from the tri-state. She's currently learning in Drisha's Beit Midrash in Israel and is an invite for the overseas students. And with that, I'll turn this to you, Tzophia.
Hello, everyone. I hope everyone is doing well, recovering from Pesach, and excited to learn Parsha together. A bunch of months ago, Rabbi Kelson, who works for Drisha, he asked me if I wanted to teach any of the classes for Parsha, and I was one of the first people to choose which Parsha. And when I saw that Kedoshim was open, I was so excited. I really love mitzvah parshas. There's just like, wow, like what type of values and laws are supposed to be guiding our lives. And I really like halacha. So as a halachist mind, it's also just very fun for me. And then as I was learning the parsha, I was struck, and this is a separate thing, is my favorite parsha is Parashat Mishpatim. Tons of laws there, and like all my friends know that. And so as I was relearning Parashat Kedoshim, it struck me the difference between Parashat Kedoshim and Parashat Mishpatim. And what was so interesting for me, for those who have the source sheet, I'll share my screen in a second. Parashat Kedoshim felt a lot more disorganized than Parashat Mishpatim. Parashat Mishpatim, there were certain things that, like, oh, that's so interesting why there's some sort of disruption in this one topic. We get to Parashat Kedoshim, and one second you're talking about a field, next second you're talking about a court system, they're talking about Avodah Zarah, then you go back, then you talk about a riot. Like every few psukim feels different. Sometimes they're like, one topic is interrupted with something else. So this really fun, so I'm sharing my screen. So I was telling my friend about this, and she found this meme on some Facebook Parsha group chat that I thought was so funny and so accurate. Parshat Mishpatim, let's categorize mitzvah. Bein Adam Lechavero, mostly strict, or Bein Adam Lamako, mostly strict. And you get Parshat Kedoshim, and it says laundromat, bingo, canoe rental, tanning, notary, like a little bit of a mishkabobble of everything. Which is like so exciting when thinking about, like, wow, there's so much to talk about with each particular mitzvah. How do you even choose? Do you speak about like the order. If you look at Ibn Ezra's commentary on the Parsha, he spends a lot of time speaking about like, why does this mitzvah come before that mitzvah. But besides the fact that I really want to share this wonderful meme that my friend sent me, and for anyone who's ever visited Washington Heights, it felt very relatable. Like, wow, I feel like I've seen that every other block in the Heights. But I decided instead of talking big picture or connection between mitzvah, but to really delve into one mitzvah. And one of my favorite mitzvahs of the Parsha, as great as all of them are, and I love them all, I love the mitzvah of Kalayim. I think it's really meaningful and beautiful. I really enjoyed learning the Mishnayot of Kalayim. V'ahavta l'recha kamocha is also great, probably the most famous pasuk in the Parsha. But I felt like this is something that not everyone gets an opportunity to learn about. And one of my favorite Rambans on all of Torah is in this week's Parsha. So how can I pass up this opportunity to talk about Kilayim? So we're going to talk about Kilayim, and we're going to really focus in about what's the reason of the mitzvah. And it's very interesting because this particular mitzvah has a Rashi that we're going to get to that content-wise is very famous, but is not very famous for being known in the context of Kilayim. So I'm very excited. So this week's Parsha, we are introduced to Kilayim in source number 1. Echukotai tishmor behemtcha lo tarbia Kilayim, sadcha lo tizra Kilayim, uvege Kilayim shatnez lo yale alav. So when we're introduced to Kilayim, this is the first time in the Torah we're introduced to Kilayim, we're shown 3 different types of Kilayim. Kilayim, yeah, it's a debate about what it literally means, but content-wise, it's when you mix 2 different things or 2 different breeds together. So this implies with animals, you can't crossbreed animals, and you can't crossbreed fruits. And for your clothing with shatnez, you can't have different types of materials together, which is only 2 particular types, but the idea of like all of them, you're mixing something together. So we have 3 different types of Kilayim that come up. And it's interesting, just as a side note, the only other time that Kilayim really comes up is in Devarim. And when we actually look at those psukim there, they give a different list of 3, with only one, like, the list 2 of them are the same and 1 is different. So source number 2, lo tizra karmacha Kilayim, right? So once again, like, your field shouldn't have Kilayim. Pentik dash hamleya hazer asher tizra utfuat hakerem. So here specifically, it's slightly different. In Vayikra, it says sadcha, your field, and here it says karmacha, your vineyard. So there, it speaks about some sort of Kilayim with your planting, but there it's talking about grain, and here it's talking about within planting agriculture, but specifically within grapes, that you're not allowed to do Kilayim. Then next pasuk, lo tacharosh b'shor b'chamor yachtav. So instead of talking about something about animals being together, crossbreeding them, it speaks about animals, but it says they're not allowed to plow together, which is a little bit surprising because what's the big deal about that? I mean, big question that we're going to talk about for all of it is what's the big deal with any of it? But that feels like really not a big deal. And then lo til shatnez semru fishtim yachtav, you can't wear shatnez, and here it says explicitly what those materials are, which the pasuk in Vayikra did not mention. So these are the times that we speak about Kilayim. So in our list from Vayikra, we have animals, we have grain, clothing, and then when we get to Devarim, we're introduced not only grain, also grapes. Not only grapes, we also have animals not plowing together. So there's 5 different types of Kilayim. Interesting, why does it come up in 2 separate parts of the Torah, and like why shatnez is in both of them, but the other 2 are slightly different? Why should the things that both have to do with agriculture are separate, but the things with the animals are separate? Would have made more sense for the animals to be together and the field stuff to be together. So lots of questions. That's not what we're going to deal with today, but just things of thought to have discussions after, because everyone's going to be talking about Kalayim. So now we're going to talk about what specifically is the reason for Kalayim. Just I'll pause for a second. If anyone has any thoughts, what is so bad about mixing things? I mix things all the time. I mix my ingredients together.
Um, can I speak for in terms of animals plowing together? I mean, obviously, we're very divorced from any sort of animal farm work. But my understanding, if it's a stronger animal and a weaker animal yoked together, it's hard. I mean, the weaker one can't keep up, and the stronger one has to do extra. So that's actually a hardship on the animal. In terms of mating together, I mean, look, people use mules all the time. That I can't give an answer. But at least in terms of them working or being yoked together, my understanding is that it creates a hardship for the animal.
So you're saying that this makes a lot of sense. It's going to cause Sa'ar Bali Chaim, and that's the underlying principle for this particular one. So you have 1 out of the 5, and then we got the rest. So that's one possibility for one of them. Any other thoughts about any of them?
I think I once learned that it has to do with you are sort of one-upping God, so to say, that God created these specific species, and you are trying to say, well, if you did this. I used to explain it to my students. It's like looking at a painting and saying, well, if Rembrandt had just used a little more blue here, it would have been even better. Who are you to say this? That type of thing.
Yeah. So Deborah, what you just said, we're actually going to see in the Shita Haramban. So you really that was definitely one of the main opinions.
Well, that's where I got it from. It wasn't my idea.
Well, Baruch Hashem that you remember. Amazing. And that's actually my favorite Ramban that we're going to get to. So we're going to talk about that a little bit more shortly. But any other thoughts? Right. So right now we have a possible reason for animals plowing together, possible reason for Kalayim. So I guess, Deborah, what do you say that reason of the Ramban? Which one of these should it explain?
I think about the animals, about the grain. I guess any time that you breed, when you put two things together, what you're really doing is you're creating something new. And that's the idea behind Kilayim, that you are improving upon what there was originally. I think it's the Uber idea from it.
So you're saying anytime that you're going to have a total new creation at the end, that's when it's going to apply. So that would apply with field things and with animals crossbreeding, which is interesting because then let's say animals working together, perhaps, or shortness of the clothing. Does that reason apply? Does it not apply? But that definitely works for multiple of the reasons. Any other thoughts? Miriam, I see that you've commented a bunch. If you want to speak about your thoughts about the reason.
Yeah, thanks. I just wasn't a panelist yet, so I couldn't speak earlier. Yeah, I don't know. I was, I'd always known about Kilayim, and I never really thought about it in my normal life. But I absolutely co-plant stuff in my garden, and I eat stuff that is mixed at the genetic level. So presumably we don't necessarily go by it, or is this only applicable in SSO?
Wow, these are such good questions. A bunch of years ago, I gave a shir that touched on Kalayim. Someone's like, so if you see the title of my shir on the source sheets, what's wrong with nectarines? Someone's like, wait, so can I not eat X, Y, and Z? And I was like, oh, that doesn't sound right. Right? Like, can I not own a mule? So it's very interesting that probably also comes about what's the reason of it. If it's about I'm actively creating something, well, once it already exists, I haven't one-upped God, right? It's just there. I went to the store. By me eating a nectarine, am I saying, haha, God, I too am a creator? And about if this applies in Chutz La'aretz, the answer is slipping me right now, but I'd be happy to look it up later. And if I got your email or something, respond. Because a lot of that, because it's interesting with agriculture, right? So if there's something about like, I'm one-upping God, that should apply in every place, right? If this is something that's a Kedusha part of the land, then that'd be something else. But you have to like ask bigger, deeper questions like why should it be fine or should it not be fine? Any other thoughts before I continue? Okay, great. Well, we had a few different ideas floating around, which is where it gets really interesting. So if you look at source number 3, which is Rashi gives us a little bit of a letdown. Not really a letdown, chas v'shalom, but you're like, okay, I'm ready. And what does Rashi say? Okay, so et chukotai tishmoru. Right, so if you see in the pasuk in Vayikra, it says, my ordinances you should keep. So Rashi says, ve'elu hein behemtecha lo tarbia kilayim v'chulei chukim. What are chukim? Elu gzer hamelech she'ein ta'am ladavar. There's no reason. That was so silly that I even asked you what you thought the reason was, because that's it. It's a chok. And it's very interesting. So I mentioned earlier that when people think of the idea of a chok as not having a reason, typically people think of the Rashi, actually in Parashah Chukat, in the beginning about Para Aduma, right? I mean, the Parsha itself is called Chukat. So you're like, if I have to come up with a Devar Torah about Parashah Chukat, the word chok is definitely the first thing that comes to my mind. It's in the name of the Parsha. That's probably why people think of Rashi or that idea of a chok specifically there, but this Rashi came a sefer before Chukat, and it's very interesting. So Rashi's like, there's no reason. So I guess this is the first time Rashi's having to tell you, all right, chok, no reason. So where does Rashi get this idea from? He gets this idea most likely from this Gemara in Yoma. So Tana Rabbanan, the rabbis taught in a Braita, it's mishpatai ta'asu, my mishpatim you should do. Dvarim she'ilmale lo nichtavu, dinhu shichtavu. That these are things that the Torah never wrote about, we would have figured out. Like when the Torah said, don't steal, that wasn't the biggest chiddush in the world. I think that people could have figured that out. I think people who don't have the Torah or religion think that you shouldn't steal. And if you look at most civilized societies, that's a rule everywhere across the board. Okay, the idea of Shabbos, like I'm not doing malacha, isn't necessarily across the board, right? But things like not stealing, not hurting people, that is a mishpat. That's something that we could have intuited. Ve'eluhein. So ve'eluhein, what are things that we would have been able to come to the conclusion on our own? Avodah zara, gila araya, shvicha damim, gezel, uberkat Hashem. Uberkat Hashem is really a euphemism for cursing God's name. Et chukotai tishmoru, but my ordinances you should keep. Svarim shasatan shiv alehem ve'eluhein. So these are things, it's such an interesting formulation. Things that the Satan will like challenge you on, which is like, it's not like the inverse of things you would have figured out on your own. So things that people are going to, the Satan is going to challenge you on. And what are the things that like the Satan is going to challenge you on? Achila chazir, levishat shatnez, chalitza ivama, tara metzora, vesar hamishta leach. So what is this? Eating pig, right? That's not something super intuitive at all, right? Wearing shatnez, doing yibum or chalitza, the metzora process, sending out the seir mishta leach, v'shema tomar ma'aseh tohuheim. And people might say, like, this is ridiculous. Like, what are you doing? Right? So this is something that I hear a lot about Sukkot, where I've heard a lot of people make a joke. Like, someone were to come and like an alien would come and see everyone just like shaking random things in a bunch of directions, and someone would look at that and be like, what is going on? So if you have no concept, ever heard of Judaism before, I'm like, oh, so sorry, I don't eat pig. Oh, how come? Like, it doesn't chew its cud, so you can't eat pig. That doesn't make any sense to anyone, right? If you're not in the system, like, that doesn't make any sense. So it's really interesting. Just a few things to point out that I noticed from this Gemara, that ironically in this list, we don't even have Para Aduma, which I just thought was interesting. Going back to my Para Aduma point, is like, that's where it's so famous, but the Gemara that Rashi gets it from doesn't speak about it. But what does it speak about? It speaks about shatnez. And it's just interesting because the Gemara, right? So something that I briefly mentioned before is, right, so what's a mishpat? It's something that I would have known without it. And I would have expected the Gemara to say, what's a chok? Something that I wouldn't have known without the Torah. But yeah, what does it say in the Gemara? It doesn't say, I wouldn't have figured it out. It says, oh, the Satan's going to like test you on it, which is not the opposite. So it's very interesting that Rashi, what he says that ein ta'am ladavar, right? He says there's no reason to it. But I wouldn't have necessarily known for sure that the fact that people are going to test me on it means there's no reason. It just might be like, I'd love to hear what people have things to say. Like, just because I can't explain something, or if I wouldn't have been able to intuit it by myself, does that mean there's no reason for it? Like, what are people's intuitions? Yes, Sandra?
So my question, when you had asked this just a few minutes before, but I thought maybe it was a little heretical. So, but if we tone it down, maybe it won't be. Who's to say that the reason for these things that are not intuitively obvious, or that are the almost opposite of mishpatim, that these chukim are not there just to just take one little step away from Rashi, like, okay, what Rashi took the first step, let's go one on top of that. Maybe just to make us different from the people around us. And that's the reason for so many of the, the korbanot mitzvot and all these other mitzvot that we've learned, and you're a mitzvah expert, presumably, I know this. So I mean, that seems to be a reason, an unexplained reason, but a reason nonetheless, for doing things that are not intuitively obvious and only serve to, what's the word, make us distinctive. And so isn't that what Kedoshim means? So Kedoshim we define as holy. So I've been thinking for the last 15 minutes, maybe part of the reasons are something that just is to Kedoshim us, to make us distinctive, to make us different from everyone around us. I think the peer pressure and the issue when he says so that the Satan wouldn't challenge you. Oh my goodness, can you imagine? That must be so enormously huge 2,000 years ago, when you're the only one, everyone's raising pigs and you're not eating them. I mean, who knows what in an agrarian society and surrounded by Canaanites and who knows what? It could have been an absolutely impossible thing. That they would have basically, and we know this from Nevi'im, and that they just assimilated and assimilate. So maybe, all by way of getting around to say that I'm thinking the pressure is so great to assimilate. You want to be like the neighbors. These are such peculiar rules. Maybe they're peculiar just to make us kadosh.
Yeah. Wow. There were just so many points. I started taking notes.
Oh, yeah. Teacher under my skin. You can't get me out of there, right? But you know what I'm saying.
Yeah, totally. I think that just to tease it out, I think there are a few separate things that, like, I guess, ideas or themes that came up. So number one, you said that Kedoshim means holiness, which is actually interesting because Kadosh
and separateness. Pardon me, separateness and holiness.
So it's interesting that at first, like, I think typically people think of Kedoshim as holy, but if you actually look at how Kedusha is used in different contexts and different forms, it actually probably does mean distinctness or separateness, right? We do Kiddush on Friday night because we're saying it is separate from the rest of the week, right? When you do Kiddushin in marriage, you're saying that you are separate from everyone else, right? And even Rashi on Kedoshim to you, he says Prushim, you should be separate. He speaks about it in context of Arayot, but the idea like it's a separation. So that definitely is something. So the question is it separation from other people? Is it separate because like we don't want to assimilate? Is it separation because we want to sort of put up a flag of we are God-fearing people? Definitely all a possibility. So what you're saying is, according to what you're saying, the outgrowth of B is particulars don't matter of any particular mitzvah. It's just a general system of following mitzvah, which there definitely are philosophers that think that there's like a degree of that. There's some philosophers who think there are big picture values in mitzvah, but the particulars don't matter. We just had to choose something. There's some people, let's say Yeshaya Leibovitz, Nechama Leibovitz's brother, his like theory on mitzvah is you only keep mitzvah for no reason except that you were commanded. And if you think any other reason, like besides that is like the reason of it, like you're wrong. Like it's that we are mitzuved people, we keep the Torah, which is slightly different than what you're saying. You were saying giving a reason, but not a reason of a particular mitzvah. But it's possible, like according to, let's say, Yeshaya Leibovitz, there is a reason, but a different reason. And the reason is I'm a commanded person, so whatever God chose, that's it. I'm on board. So there definitely are people that say all those different things. So I have not written you down as a kofar. Don't worry.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Not that you need stamp of approval, but you're good. But Rashi clearly makes it seem like there's no reason. But how Rashi's saying it is not what you're saying, Sandra. It's not that the reason is not a particularistic thing. It just seems like it's Gzeir HaMelech, like God did it. God had no reason for doing it. I guess it's maybe more in the Yeshaya Leibovitz's camp of we do it because it's Gzeir HaMelech, and that's it. But there's no real substantial.
The reason would have been a general title, a caption saying, making us distinctive. Not no reason, not because we're commanded. Don't necessarily fall into that camp, but I'm just saying perhaps it's because it makes us distinctive to obey things that may not be intuitively obvious.
Right. And I definitely think that is a fair possibility. I just don't think that's what Rashi thinks necessarily.
No. Mm-hmm.
Right. So Team Rashi is Gzeir HaMelech. Amazing. But then Deborah, I see you changed your name to Debbie. So now we're gonna go to the Ramban. My favorite Ramban on Chumash, or definitely top 5. Don't want to discriminate just in case I love other ones and I can't remember them at the moment. Okay, so if we get to source 6, it's Chukotai Tishmar. He quotes Rashi, and as one of my teachers would say, and he jumped up and down and spit what a nickels. He had a very strong reaction. He quotes Rashi and then Velo is kira botinu shia hatam ne'elam b'shia yitzer avuma olam mishivim elem ela blivi shatnez. So Ramban's first qualm with Rashi is if you actually look at the Gemara, when the Gemara gave a list of different chukim, it said wearing shatnez, which definitely it's over here in our pasuk wearing shatnez. But like I mentioned before, there are 3 types of kalayim in this pasuk. There are 2 other types of kalayim in Devarim, and Rashi he just quotes on the pasuk, right? His Dibur Hamatkil is chukotai, like my statutes, my laws, and he sort of lumps them all together and say none of them have a tam. So Ron's like, okay, Rashi, you expanded things a little bit too much. And don't say that they all don't have a tam. They do have a tam. Okay. And then the second thing that the Ramban says is ואין הכוונה בהם שתהיה גזר מלך, מלכי המלכים, בשום מקום below time. And when Chazal in Masechet Yoma said they didn't say that there's no reason to it. They just said that the Umot Olam or the Satan, they're going to mishivin aleihem. They're just going to ask you questions about it, right? So Rashi, number one, you just said there's no reason. That's not what the Gemara said at all. Number two, you've expanded what the Gemara said to multiple examples when the Gemara only mentioned it for one thing. So those are two separate kashas that the Ramban has on Rashi, which I think are very strong. Right, and so the Ramban continues to say, and so what does it mean that it's a chok? It just means bli sheigla tolatam la'am. We weren't given the reason, right? Ve'inam na'nim behem, and we're not privy. And like when I do the mitzvah, I'm like, I'm not doing kilayim. I can't be like, it's so clear to me in my mind why this mitzvah exists. Aval mehar re'inareim belibam makablim otam li'er malchut. Like you can think about it, right? And you can use it as like part of your avodas Hashem, right? And him haisuru asher lo b'torah she'ein amach shivim na'nim behem k'mishpatim, right? They're not as clear as the logical laws, right? When I don't steal, I understand. It makes sense. You need that for social society to function. Aval kulam b'ta'am nachon b'tol shlima. There's all a reason. It's not just for a general, because you have to do it. They have real reasons. And then he says, well, what is the reason? As Debbie beautifully said, Vatam b'klayim ki Hashem bara haminim b'olam. God created the world. B'chol balei nefashot b'tzmachim u'balei nefesh. Whether with agriculture, whether with animals, he created both of them. V'natam b'hem koach hatoladat. And God created them with their own ability to propagate, right? They didn't need me to do it. Let's say you think of bees with pollination and they fly in the air and seeds are able to blow in the wind and regrow. Animals know how to have kids without us. They don't need our help, right? God created them, their self-sustaining ability to do that. La'ad l'kolzman forever, she'yirtzeh hu yitzbarach b'kiyum ha'olam, because God wanted the world to function the way that it was. And God commanded them to stay liminam. If you look at Bereshit, the word liminehem, limino comes up a lot. Like God cares about the species. These are the species that he created. And then the kicker, right? So, and a person who doesn't do that, saying, God, you just didn't do a good enough job. So God, you didn't finish completing the world, so I'm going to help you out. Like you couldn't do it, I'm going to. So that's the main reason that the Ramban gives. That's the more essential reason. And then he gives sort of a siman l'davar, something to hint to us why it's so important. And he speaks about, just on a practical note, this isn't actually scientifically true, but he's like, but if you crossbreed fruits, they're not going to be able to regrow the next generation, which is against the reason what God wanted originally. And this is something he also speaks about with animals, right? So a horse and a donkey, if they have a mule, mules are not able to have kids. And that's a siman l'davar. God wanted the world to be able to propagate, and you've created something that cannot propagate, which is going totally antithetical to God's goal of the world, right? So you're acting like God, and by you acting like God, you're actually undoing what God wanted. So really bad reasons. Right, you do not want to do kilayim. So on the one hand, we got Rashi, there's no reason. Ramban has two kashas on Rashi. Number one, he didn't read the Gemara correctly, and just because it's not Megillah doesn't mean there's no Tom. And then he brings 1/2 reasons why you should not do kilayim. And if you look at source number 7, just for time, I'm just going to speak that outside. And also, it's from the Moreh Nevuchim, which was originally written in Arabic, so there's not really so much value to reading it in the Hebrew versus the English. Once you're not in the original, it's all a translation, so it's all right. But the Moreh Nevuchim, he speaks about in his third chilek, that there are people who are just like, there's no reason for God's mitzvot, and that's bad. God has a reason for the mitzvot. It's to improve us, right? So if you think about it being not necessarily being more distinct, but you're being a more godly person, if you're working on your midot, to have good midot, to get away from bad midot. So there's a real reason for the mitzvot. We do not like this idea that we're just rejecting this. And it especially makes a lot of sense for the Rambam himself to have said this. Rambam is known for being a very big rationalist. And if you look at in Sefer Ava, in Mishnah Torah, in Yesodei HaTorah, he speaks about Ava Hashem, and part of the mitzvah of Avad Hashem is like understanding Hashem. And the Rambam thinks the way to be Mekayim Avad Hashem is understanding, right? So the Rambam puts a very big emphasis on the understanding of things. So it'd be very antithetical for the Rambam to say there's no reason for anything and just do things blindly. Rambam would not be into Emunah Pshuta. It's all about the deeper your intellect, the deeper your connection with God. So it makes a lot of sense. We're going to get to this later, but the Rambam, even though he thinks there's a reason for the mitzvah, he has a completely different reason than the Ramban. We'll get to that later. Right, so we have Rashi, Ramban, head to head. And I didn't want to leave Rashi just hanging there, so I wanted to, it's sort of like we're doing an Ian Chumash here. So I'm going to give some defenses for Rashi. Can't leave Rashi hanging. So I brought some super commentaries of Rashi to help Rashi and poke some holes in the Ramban. The Ramban's so upset at Rashi, but Ramban, hold up. There's also some real challenges and questions on your Shita. But if anyone has any thoughts of like, if you could think of any challenges for the Ramban before I read from the super commentaries, feel free. But if not, I'm just gonna. All right, so I'm gonna continue. Okay, so the Gur Aryeh, he says, Ela shekasheli et hatam shenatan Ramban. Ramban, I'm a little bit confused by your reasoning that you gave. Right, Ramban, what does he say? That I'm one-upping God, right? I'm saying I'm going to complete creation. God, you didn't complete enough. You didn't do a complete job. I got it. But is that really true? That's a value, right? Is it that I'm supposed to say, here's the world, and I just don't do anything? Since when is that a value? He says that's totally not true. Demabakach, daha amru chachamim. The rabbis themselves said, Kol davar she'hakadosh baruch hu bara b'sheish mei bereshit tzarich tikun. Everything that exists in the world needs a completion, right? Needs this complete ending of the fixing of it. Right? Bread doesn't fall out of the sky. I need to take wheat from the ground, grind it, knead it, bake it, and then I can eat it. And yet no one says, oh my gosh, Sophia, you just baked bread? Like, are you from? Are you a gopher? That's a ridiculous thing to say. And we also, if you look at Brit Milah, God created man, and 8 days into this baby's life, where clearly this baby shouldn't have any problems, we're doing something l'takena taguf of this baby. And I didn't bring it here, but if you look at the Sefer HaChinuch on the mitzvah of Milah, it's actually so beautiful what he says. He says Milah is a quintessential mitzvah where it teaches us that the world isn't perfect and God needs our hishtatfut, our participation to make the world better. Like, that seems like such a deep, meaningful religious value. So where is the Ramban coming from? So that's problem number one with the Ramban, is just your religious ideologies. It's missing something. So he says that, but he does give a little bit of give, where he's like, Ramban, you have some truth to what you're saying. He says this, when it comes to not crossbreeding animals, there's a reason. Like, you're right. The world was created a certain way, and you're going against the rules of nature. That doesn't mean I'm saying, God, you haven't done a good enough job. But it is agreeing, like, yes, you are going against the rules of nature. We don't like that. We like nature. Aval b'shatnez. But when it comes to shatnez, the inkan shnei minim uvdalim. Shatnez is like you're creating a new thing and a new product. You just combine some materials, right? For that doesn't, this idea of like going against the rules of nature isn't so shaykh. It doesn't really apply so much to shatnez. So he's pointing out there is a reason for the kalayim, not, and that doesn't work for shatnez. But he says, but Baruch Hashem, the Ramban did mention that. The Ramban, in his commentary, he said, when he was complaining against Rashi, he said, Rashi, the Gemara only spoke about shatnez. Why do you apply to all of them? So the Ramban did say that explicitly. So he's like, you know what, Ramban, ubavadai bazeh yafeh peir Ramban, she'en lomar she'en tam b'devar, rak el al isar shatnez. The Ramban, in his own commentary, does admit that shatnez is qualitatively different. What is he supposed to do with the Gemara, right? He does agree that there's that. So Gur Aryeh disagrees with a fundamental main religious thought of the Ramban, but does give some agreement, haskamas. So that was the Gur Aryeh. So that was one super commentary of Rashi. And then we have the Mizrahi, another super commentary of the Rashi.
Do you know how the Gur Aryeh would respond? Like, if you look at the tag on your clothes, of course, it's going to be mixed. There's, 20% rayon and 30% elastic and whatever, right? Polyester. And we say that's fine. It's just linen and wool that we're concerned with. So this seems to say pretty explicitly everything in the original. It's only Devarim that specifies linen and wool. Do you know how offhand? Like, how does he deal with that?
When you say how does he deal with that, he being the Ramban or the Gur Aryeh? Different clarification.
Well, I guess I was talking about the Gur Aryeh because it sounds like the Ramban would say, no, Hashem made wool and you can use wool. Hashem made linen, you can use linen, but you can't, make your own thing. Is that not what he's saying?
Well, the Gur Aryeh, he's supporting super commentaries of Rashi are generally in camp Rashi. So he probably would agree with Rashi. Like, there is no reason for it. And he's just trying to push back on Ramban, who's like one of the main Rishonim who push back on Rashi. So he probably be like, yeah, there's no reason. It doesn't make sense. It's Gezer HaMelech. That's probably what he would say, since he's so team Rashi. Does that answer your question?
Sorry, muting issues. Thanks. Yeah.
Okay. Amazing. This is also just a general thing to think about when learning is when someone defends someone, is that because they want to protect them, or is that because they always align with them? So Besof Hayom, I don't actually know what the Gur Aryeh's personal opinion is, but his goal is at least to explain Rashi. So at least that's what he would say. Rashi would say. I haven't learned enough Gur Aryeh to know if he ever is cholik on Rashi, so that's I can't say like for sure, but that's what I would assume the Gur Aryeh would say. Okay, so now we're gonna go to the Mizrahi. Wow, this is so fun. I hope everyone's having as much fun as I am. Venerelli, she'emi zeh Tana Klal. So the Mizrahi also responds to Ramban. I do not see what you're talking about, Ramban. And his reason is actually a more literary reason. And I'll explain in a second. So Ramban, your reason actually only really works out to the end of your logic when it comes to animals, which does make sense, right? A mule cannot have kids. But if I have a nectarine, I'm pretty sure I could plant other nectarines. If anyone here is an expert on agriculture, feel free to correct me. But
I don't think nectarines are from hybridization. I think it's its own thing. Like a gene change is a peach and then a nectarine.
Wait, it's a gene change and not a hybridization.
Right. I think that. I could be mistaken, but from what I recall recent reading, they're their own thing.
I read that also, right? I looked it up on Google right before the class and I was surprised. I always thought it was a hybridization. Apparently I was wrong.
That's interesting. So, Justin or Joyce, from your Googling or knowledge, do you know of any like real crossbreeding and how it impacts on its seeds? Because the Ramban said that it impacts the next generation.
It does. It does. Tangelos, I think, or even maybe Meyer lemons.
Or how about pluots? That was a new thing a few
Yes.
years ago, is a plum cross. I mean, they said in the supermarkets, a plum crossed with something. And I wondered, is this kosher? I don't know. I think I heard they were. That doesn't mean, I don't remember who. I tried. I didn't like it, so I didn't buy them again. But it was a plum with an apricot, I believe, and I think it was advertised, new wonderful fruit. It's a cross between these two fruits.
So I wonder if anyone wants to do any Googling, like as we're talking, but if pluots are able to reproduce normally, if there are problems. But it's interesting because when it comes to the Torah just says, we don't want you to we don't want you to actually do the crossbreeding. It doesn't say you can't eat from it, right? You're allowed to benefit from a mule or from your pluots, right? But Shatnez, it says, lo ya'aleh, you can't wear it. But that means I could own it, right? If I bought a suit and I bring it to the Shatnez checker, I wasn't over on an Isser when I bought it. Owning it is fine, right? It's not like I'm owning a Avodah Zarah. The Isser is different, so you could keep on eating your pluots.
Can I know if you buy something from a Jewish person who did the mix?
That is a really interesting question. That is a whole sugya unto itself of, are you allowed to support people who are ovrei avera? That's a whole sugya unto itself. Maybe another class, but it's a fantastic question. But like that would be that's also like, I'm trying to think of other examples, but it's a sugya. Okay, so back to the Mizrahi. Okay, so when we get to the Mizrahi, this whole idea that the Ramban has, it actually only checks out for the behema. If people do the research about what happens to Pluot's kids, I don't know. But aval lo b'shar ha'eruvin, lo be'eruv haminem b'zriatan, at least the Mizrahi is saying it doesn't actually impact the second generation of the plants the way that the Ramban is making it seem to be. And also, if I have a cow and a horse plowing together, this idea of like, I'm a creator, it's not shaykh to there. Right, so just to note that Mizrahi is also bringing one of the types of climb from Devarim, assuming, so the Mizrahi is doing, he's assuming that the psukim, both in Vayikra and Devarim, are all in the same camp. And if I wear Shatnez, I'm not like, hi God, ha ha ha, I've created something new. I'm not thinking he didn't create the world perfectly. And Vitam Isser Ha'erev Tzrich Sheyesh Shaveh Bekulam. And the Isser has to be the same with all of them. And why do I say this is, I think, a literary reason? If you look at the Psukim in Vayikra, they're all in the same pasuk, right? They're all in the same pasuk. There's no, like, I guess, breaking between them. I think there's this assumption that they're all in the same group, this is my, I guess, one of my ways of understanding where the Mizrahi comes from. But it's interesting because in Devarim, they're in two groups, so not for sure, but there's this assumption the Mizrahi has, they must all have the same reason. So that is one qualm that the Mizrahi has, which is interesting to assume that they all have the same reason. Yeah, so that's the part of the Mizrahi that we're going to focus on. So we've at least given Rashi a lot more, I guess, not like leeway, but like more support. Like Ramban, I mean, some people here might be more happy with saying there's no reason for mitzvah. Some people might be less happy. But for those who want to say that there's no reason for mitzvah, like, this is great. We gave you a lot more support. And Ramban's thing is not all cut out what it's supposed to be. So we've said so far 2 shito and given reasons for and defenses for both of them. So the third opinion is the Rambam. So the Rambam the Rambam, so he is really big in giving a reason for a lot of mitzvot to be about avodah zarah. And he's very expansive about it. He says, Karbano, what's the reason? It's because Ovdei avodah zarah used to do their animal sacrifices, so we want to do it differently and towards Hashem. And the Rambam has that in lots of places that you wouldn't necessarily thought of. You might have thought of. So I would not have necessarily thought of avodah zarah having to do with Kalayim, but the Ramban, either he was assuming this, or maybe he had more knowledge about avodah zarah. But he says in general that there's a lot of mitzvah ularchik mikol maaseh kishuf. We want to be very far away from kishuf. And in last week's parsha and this week's parsha, we see this idea of lo telichu bechukot hagoyim. We don't want to be similar to the non-Jews. And he says a lot of that is like there are ways that don't make sense, and a lot of them have to do with avodah zarah type of things. And he also says any of these things that these like non-Jewish people are doing that don't make any sense. Anytime you do something that doesn't really make sense, it has to do with magic. There's some sort of black, dark magic going on. And it's this type of magic has to do with the constellation, which is avodah zarah type of stuff. And so the Rambam says later on, and that's why you can't wear shatnez. And he speaks about how because, and so too when it comes to your grapevine fields, and also with Balei Chaim and your tzmachim, the people who were, I guess, in charge of the avodah zarah, they were belevushacha, they wore shatnez in like one item when they would plant, and they thought that without wearing this shatnez thing, their ma'asim wouldn't be as successful, which sounds ludicrous, right? Like if I wear a Lucky Charm bracelet when the Celtics are playing against the Cavaliers, and I'm like, they're gonna win because I'm wearing this, that it doesn't make any sense. That's not logical. So if they were putting all of the faith of the outcomes of their planting to their outfit, that doesn't make any sense. That's darchei muri. There's some sort of like kishuf type of luck thing that you think is going on. And he speaks about how this also has to do, you'll find the Sefer Avodah who like in their books, Kimin Hagam Hayalaz Roa or they would plant these things together, and they thought if they wouldn't crossbreed these seeds, the plants wouldn't be as prosperous. So he really makes it seem like this is more of a historical thing. Kalayim was something that happened, and we want to either be different or we want to be logical people. We don't want to do black magic. We rely on Hashem, not in Kishuv. So that is the Rambam. And I put for the last source, the Sefer Chinuch, as sort of Shita 2.5, somewhere between the Ramban and the Rambam. It's very interesting because he gives a very similar reason to the Ramban, that it's about like you're creating, you think God didn't create a good enough world, but he actually also explicitly connects Kishuv, like magic, to Kilayim. Over here, I brought the mitzvah where he speaks about killing witches. But if you also look at his mitzvah on Kilayim, he says, and look over there where I said by Kishuv. So he actually makes this explicit connection between Kishuv and Kilayim. Right, and he says, "V'inyan hakishavu lefi dati kein she'Hashem baruch hu b'tchila b'ri'ah l'kol davar v'davar midivrei olam tava l'fol b'pul tova v'yishra." God created the world; everything's working well. And someone is using kishuv; they're employing a similar thing, saying, "Actually, how the world is, I want to change it." And with Kalayim, I'm trying to change things. Right, so he thinks this idea of kishuv, of some sort of magic, does have to do with Kalayim, but for the same reason as the Ramban, but makes a similar connection as the Rambam. So just for summarization, We have 3 different shita. What is the reason for Kilayim? First one is there is nothing. Second one is you're acting like a crater. And third one is Avodah Zarah. And hopefully people understand Kilayim a lot more, and highly recommend more research to be done, whether about halachic sugyas. There's a lot there. Why Tzemer Pishtan? There's not many questions. And thank you everyone for all your participation, your questions. I loved all of it. And if you have any questions, feel free to stay on. I see Justin has a question, but anyone else feel free to go.
I think Justin, yeah. Go ahead.
Thank you.
So it's more of a comment. So I looked in the Sefira Zman on Reish Nun on this Parashah, and he clarifies 1 or 2 things. This was in regard to the question before about whether or not Kilayim is relevant in Chutz La'aretz as opposed to Israel. And he notes the Gemara in Kedoshim, and he says, the Mekish Harkavat Ilan Laharabat Behima Shenoheg B'chol Makom. So the idea of the seeds seems to only apply to Israel. However, tree hybridization, according to the Gemara there, is related to the hybridization of animals. And he says later on, Kla'e Zra'im aval Kla'e Ha'ilanot Kalamar Harkava Shehi Asura Bahen Noheged Afilu B'chutz La'aretz Kmo She'amarnu V'asur li Yisrael Laniach Hagoy La'akidi Lano. So apparently animals and trees and Chutz La'aretz also can't be hybridized by a Jew.
Thank you so much, Justin. Any other questions, comments? All right. Well, thank you so much, everyone. This was really such a fun share. Everyone had such great things to add.
Thank you so much, Tzophia. Oh, sorry. Didn't mean to interrupt. Thank you so much. Thank you, Tzophia, and thank you to everyone else for the comments and questions. Let me double check that we don't have any questions or comments on Facebook. No, just likes. Thanks to everyone here on Zoom and also on Facebook for being part of our learning community. Just a few announcements that with Sefira Zman just having started this week, we have many more classes. We have classes meeting on Sunday through Thursday in the mornings, afternoon, and evenings. Some highlights that I want to mention now are Mishnah in Depth, Sota with Rabbi Avi Wolfish. It's on Sundays at 1:30 p.m. Eastern. We also have Law and Practice in Early Judaism on Tuesdays at 12:30 p.m. Eastern with Dr. Malka Simkovich. I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly. And of course, we also have discussions on the Parashah. Next week, we have a more with Miss Daphna Nitzan. So thank you so much again, Tzophia, and everyone else. And I'm looking forward to seeing you next time.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.